Sleep apnea affects millions of people around the world, and we're going to demystify it. We'll have special guests ranging from the most prominent sleep doctors, influential patient advocates, representatives and CEOs of medical device companies, allied health professionals, and many more. Most importantly, this show is for you to get your questions answered. Let's get to it. All right, welcome to the Hacking Sleep Apnea Show. I'm Brady Nelson, and today we have a special guest, Phil Elmore. And Phil is from upstate New York. He's a technical writer and author, and he's also a patient advocate for sleep apnea. And we're going to talk a bit about his book, The 10 Things That Doctors Won't Tell You About Your CPAP Machine. So Phil, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So maybe you can just enlighten us a little bit without telling us, I guess, the entire book that we're going to talk about in a bit. But your story about sleep apnea.
Well, years ago, I was informed, hey, you snore a lot. You should really get that checked. And I eventually went to the doctor and they said, well, you need a sleep study and that's going to be $1,200 and your insurance doesn't cover it. I'm like, well, guess I'll snore. And I didn't think anything of it at the time. But about 2 years ago, I got horribly sick and I had a throat infection and then I had pneumonia and then I had bronchitis. And after a while, I realized that I wasn't getting better. And I went back to my doctor and I said, hey, when I go up the stairs, I feel like I'm going to pass out and die. And like more than just fat guy going up the stairs, like something's really wrong. And the doctor said, well, it might be your heart. And I said something like, what? And turns out it was. They told me that there was something wrong with my heart, that I had a reduced ejection fraction. My heart was not pumping enough blood. And as a result, it was pumping faster at rest in order to try and compensate. Well, the funny thing about having a resting heart rate that's over 100, you hate everyone. And boy, did I. I was miserable. And what I realized, they immediately sent me in for, I started collecting medical specialists like Pokemon.
Yeah.
I've got a cardiologist, I've got a pulmonary doctor, I've got all kinds of specialists. And the cardiologist put me on medication. And the first thing that did was make it easier for my heart to beat so that hopefully it would slow down a little. And I sat down at my desk one morning after starting the medication. And I'm like, what is this curious sensation? Oh, I don't hate everyone. And I realized that I had been a really enormous jerk to everyone for about 6 months.
Right.
I had a lot of apologies I had to go through. I'm like, hey, sorry I was constantly tearing your head off. I was dying. So in conjunction with that, they said, hey, guess what? Your insurance is really going to pay for this sleep study now. And I didn't know what to expect. I knew I was going to have to spend the night in some facility somewhere. I did the sleep study. They said, yeah, you stop breathing about once a minute. I'm like, that sounds bad. I'm like, yeah, oh yeah, that's really bad. That's what's killing you. Yeah. So I'm like, well, I guess we better fix that then. So they gave me a CPAP machine. That was a horror in and of itself because adjusting to sleeping with a CPAP machine is not easy. I was under the impression you put the machine on, you sleep for the first time, you wake up and you're hearing the classical music from the opening of the Smurfs and everything is good and there are animated birds and butterflies and you're like, oh, sleeping is wonderful. Well, no, I didn't feel that way at all. In fact, I did not actually sleep for 3 days straight because I couldn't adjust to the machine. And I went into my sleep doctor on the third day and I said, if you don't fix this, I will jump off a building. And the woman in the office next door fled. She's like, crazy person. Like, I had to apologize to her later. She actually left because she was worried I was unstable. And they, bless his heart, the guy at the sleep clinic was like, well, let's see if we can't make some adjustments. He was unfailingly positive. Well, once I finally adjusted to the machine, I very slowly started to experience the benefits. It didn't happen overnight. It took a while. But suddenly, people in my life started commenting on the difference. My brother thought I was narcoleptic. He's like, yeah, you used to fall asleep whenever you stopped moving. Like, you would just sit down and you'd be asleep. So, and I do a lot of driving in my capacity as a writer. I commute to various clients, and it was extraordinarily dangerous. I was tired all the time. And that just being able to drive down the road and not feel like you're falling asleep. I mean, I was chugging energy shots and, just doing anything I could to stay alert. It's night and day. I've been on the CPAP therapy for 2 years now. I've fully adjusted to it. It doesn't feel normal to sleep without it. But there was so much that I wished someone had told me about what this experience was going to be like. No one did. They pretty much just sent me on my way and said, okay, use the machine now. And if I had just known then what I know now, the transition would have been a lot easier. So I sat down and I wrote, it's a relatively brief book. It's just a short little 99-cent thing, 10 things doctors won't tell you about your CPAP machine. And what I meant with that title is, these are the things they didn't tell me that I wish somebody had. And the response to the book has been kind of amazing. Just in Kindle alone, I'm probably going to end up offering a paperback as well because it's taken off. But I've been kind of stunned by how many people have read the book. I've had wonderful messages sent to me from people who said, hey, this really helped me, and some nice comments. And then, the occasional, oh, this is really short, but at least it's 99 cents. The typical internet comments, but I've been really amazed. And what it drove home to me was how many people have this problem and are coping with this problem. And that implies there are a lot more people out there who aren't getting the treatment they need.
No, I read it, and actually I love that you didn't hold anything back in it, because there's a lot of people that can relate to your story. How long did it take you to go from being diagnosed with sleep apnea to actually feeling like you're fully treated with it? How long did it take you to get used to your CPAP machine?
Well, it took a long time. There was a lot of waiting in every part of the process. They first diagnosed that I had the problem, and they gave me the medication. So that started helping right away. But I still didn't have the machine. So at night, I wasn't really sleeping. I was engaging in this facsimile of sleep where I would wake up feeling just as bad or worse as when I went to bed. So then I had to wait to get the sleep study, which took some time. Right. Then I had to wait to get the results from the sleep study because it takes time for them to process it. Then I had to wait for the fitting for the CPAP machine. There's weeks in between each one of these stops. Once I was finally fitted for the CPAP machine, then I had to deal with getting used to the machine. And of course, one of the things I say in the book is you can't accept the first mask they give you because there's different types of masks. There's one on the nose, there's a full face mask, there's one that's kind of in between. And they're like, what would be great for sleeping is if you shove these up your nostrils every night. I'm like, really? I don't see how anyone chooses that option. Oh, no, people love it. So finally, after going back and forth and getting the pressure settings changed, there's all these variables, and you have to nail some of them down to get any part of the equation to where you can adjust the others. So once we finally got the pressure settings and the mask, the right mask fitted, and the right relief settings on the machine, finally I started to feel like I could at least sleep with the machine.
Right. And
then things got weird because my body for years had been deprived of restful sleep.
Yeah.
So when I finally started sleeping through the night, and I did the whole night because fear is a remarkable motivator. Some people, they don't want to sleep with the machine and they fight it. And I was deeply, deeply depressed at first. I'm like, the joy of sleep has been taken from me forever. And I say it jokingly, but I honestly felt like I was never going to get a good night's sleep again. And that's a terrible, terrible thing to experience. I really felt despondent over it. And once I finally did sleep, I woke up 5 hours later and was like, what happened? And I was in the exact same position I had been in when I went to bed. For the first time, I got restful sleep. Well, I didn't feel energized. I didn't feel a tremendous relief right away in terms of the therapy because it takes time to build your body back up. But what did happen was my brain started getting the signal, hey, you're actually rested for the first time in a long time. And because it hadn't been getting that signal, I would wake up after 5 or 6 hours without fail. I could not sleep later than 5 or 6 hours. It was kind of wild because, before I could sleep for 15 hours and not feel rested at all. So now on the machine, 5 hours later, well, guess I'm up. Got a lot of work done. Yeah. That effect has tapered off. So now I pretty much sleep reliably between 7 and 8 hours. And if I allow myself to go back to bed, I can even sort of shoehorn in 10 on a weekend if I'm really working at it. But pretty much 7 or 8 hours, which is a normal sleep cycle.
Right.
After 2 years of therapy, I do feel rested when I sleep. It does make a difference, which it never did. Well, I say never. I don't know at what point I started having sleep apnea problems, but it happens gradually. Your new normal changes constantly over the course of years. Mm-hmm. So that damage being done to my body was being done over the course of years. I've had follow-ups with my cardiologist. They saw some improvement the first follow-up, and then the second improvement, I was pretty much where I'd been during the last visit, so I don't know if it tapers off. That's the thing. when they tell you, oh, your sleep apnea probably damaged your heart, they don't know that. It's a theory. So I'm like, so my heart is damaged? Yeah. You have cardiomyopathy, which is doctor speak for your heart sucks.
Right.
I'm like, so will it get better? Yeah, we don't know. How long will it take to get better if it does? No idea. We don't know when it started. So what does that mean for me? Nobody knows.
Well, you've treated the underlying cause now, anyways.
Well, yeah, and of course, the other thing is, they tell you I've got to lose weight. There's another medication they want to put me on. This is all, this is all part of an overarching project, which is, hey, let's not die right away. Let's make at least North American male median life expectancy.
Right.
So that's kind of the target that I'm charting. But the difference in terms of being alert and awake on the therapy, it makes a huge difference. Because now, instead of stopping breathing every night once a minute, I am now breathing and sleeping. And the reason that's significant is because it's not because you snore, it's not because you make noise, it's not even because you wake up gasping. And I've experienced that. It's no fun. It's because your oxygen levels drop below a level that can sustain life. When you deprive your brain of oxygen at night like that over a long period of time, it does serious damage to your body, and that's why they think it hurt my heart.
For sure. Well, so then we know you're an author already, but what made you actually write the book? What was the point that made you want to do that?
It occurred to me, and I'm not sure at what point I got the idea, but I realized that there was all this stuff I wish someone had taken the time to tell me. Things like, hey, you're going to need to go back to the sleep clinic a whole lot to get these variables adjusted. They're going to give you a mask. It might not be the right one. You're going to have to insist on a different one. There were so many things I didn't know that I wish someone had told me going into the process so that I could have better adjusted. It was terrible trying to learn to sleep with the machine on the first time. It was a tremendous challenge. And there are people who are required to use the machine a certain number of hours in a certain number of days of the week in order to qualify for medical insurance support for the machine. Mm-hmm. I talked to one fellow. It's funny how you run into all these people who you suddenly have something in common with, which is adjusting to CPAP. And I talked to a young man. He was in his either late teens or early 20s. I was amazed that he had this problem because he was a big athletic football player type. And he's like, sometimes I just turn it on and I don't wear it. I'm like, they can tell, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And he looked at me like, what? Because the machine has a little cell phone attachment. It transmits data. It records every night the data for my sleep. It tells me how many apnea type incidents that I experience in the night. There's a number attached to that. It's called the AHI, which is the Apnea Hypnagogic Index or something like that. I'm pronouncing it wrong.
Apnea Hypopnea Index, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
And that number for a normal person is 5. Anything below 5, you're okay. Well, my number when I took my sleep study was 55. And now using the CPAP machine, I check it in the morning. It's usually less than 1 or maybe, like 1.2. It's a very nice, comfortable range. And when I wrote the book, it was specifically so that I could give to other people the information that I wish I had had. Mm-hmm. It's because no one should have to suffer the way I did. I was miserable. I hated everything. I hated everyone. I hated my life, and I thought I was never going to sleep again. And I just want people to know, look, there is hope when you have this problem, and you will adjust.
Yeah. I like what you said about, some of the people that have sleep apnea and are being treated with CPAP or some of the other treatments, they're the most least suspecting people that you would imagine, right? It's not just who you might think have it. Some people will blow your mind.
When I took my sleep study, I expected to find a bunch of other large ground-dwelling mammals in the hallway when I got done. And I walk out, and they were all thin guys. Yeah. I even said to my doctor, I'm like,
thin women, right?
Well, they were, for whatever reason, it was all men.
Oh, at your clinic, yes, of course.
But I asked my doctor, I'm like, look, if I lose a ton of weight, will that make the sleep apnea go away? He said, it might, but it might not, because sometimes it's caused by a relaxing of the muscles of your airway. It may not have anything to do with your weight. Now, yes, it might, but that's, at best, it's a maybe.
Exactly.
So, and they gave me, everyone got one of these, the most ironic coffee mug I will ever own. It is a coffee mug with the Sleep Center's name and number on it.
Oh, you still got it.
I drink out of it every day.
Oh, excellent. So the next part, before we get into sort of the mailbag segment, I'm just wondering, what is the best piece of advice you could give someone that was in your shoes?
Well, first of all, you must get treated. There are so many reasons people give themselves to not follow up on treatment. It's hard to adjust. It sounds like a hassle. It can be expensive depending on what your insurance covers, but you can't afford to ignore it. If you suspect you have sleep apnea, you will die if you do not get it treated. For years, I ignored it. I'm like, I guess I'll let it kill me. Well, it was. And I realized, oh no, I don't want to die. So the best piece of advice I can get is to pursue the treatment, even if you're afraid, even if you think it's going to be expensive. I've answered questions online from people who said, well, I don't know if I can afford a CPAP. My insurance won't cover it, and I need it, but I can't afford one. Well, there are a lot of lower cost options out there. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. I bought a CPAP machine for travel purposes for emergencies, and I got out the door out of pocket for like $360.
Right,
that was the cost of the machine, which was $200, and a mask, which is about $150 with the headgear. And those are really exorbitant prices. And then for those in the know, the best piece of advice I can give them once you're on this track is every time they say that you can have new equipment through your insurance, always say yes.
Yeah, no kidding.
Because you'll pay a lot less for backup masks and other things through the insurance than you will paying out of pocket.
Right, exactly. So why don't we get into the mailbag segment? And Phil is a pretty active commenter on a lot of different forums, so you'll probably see him on some of the sleep apnea ones out there. But so we have about 10 questions here. And we've taken some of the questions from those forums, and what we'll do, they range from anywhere from beginner knowledge to sleep apnea up to more advanced, and there's no judgment here. But the first question is, and you've kind of already answered it, but let's answer it again. What is it like to have sleep apnea?
Well, I can tell you, you're tired all the time. You're exhausted no matter how much you sleep. You're tired all the time because when you sleep, you're not sleeping. You're not resting. And one of the first questions they ask when they screen you for sleep apnea is, do you ever feel drowsy during the day? When you're at a stoplight, do you feel like you want to close your eyes and go to sleep? Do you ever fall asleep at your desk at work? All of those things and more happen to me. Sleep apnea is being tired all the time, and it's brutal. I would wake up on the weekends feeling like I'd partied all weekend, and I'm a boring middle-aged man who writes for a living. I'm like, well, that's not even fair. I should have been in Vegas if I'm going to feel like this.
Okay, on to number two is it advisable to use a CPAP machine on rent prescribed for sleep apnea patients? And there's a little bit more information to clarify. It says, instead of purchasing the CPAP, can we use a CPAP on rent, a used machine by other patients? Is there any threat of passing infection from a previous user to the new one?
Oh, no. The machine is basically just an air pump with a humidifier attached to it. So as long as it's been properly cleaned and sanitized by your provider, there's no danger in using a used machine. I almost bought a used machine because I was thinking about buying a second machine, and I eventually ended up going with a different unit because it was smaller for travel purposes. But in terms of renting versus buying, if you're going to make this a lifestyle, if it's something you're going to have to live with forever, an actual CPAP machine, I think excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. The A10 by ResMed is the current top of the line flagship one. Mm-hmm. I have an ResMed A9, which was what was issued to me 2 years ago. That goes for about $900 on CPAP.com. You can get a much cheaper machine. The travel machine I bought, like I said, was $200, although that was without the humidifier. Right. So for anywhere between $500 to $900, and $900 is, top of the line, the full boat, humidifier and everything, plus the cost of a mask, which if you buy yourself is another $150. Less than $1,000 basically will get you anything in the CPAP world, and you can go much cheaper. So you have to weigh, like, how long am I going to be using this? If it's one of those deals where they're like, hey, let's try it out. Let's see if it helps you. Let's see if you need it. I suppose renting might make more sense.
Yeah, just to further answer this question a little bit more too, like back when I used to train to be a respiratory therapist, we had a clinic at this school, and people would donate their old CPAP machines, and people would come, so then patients would be referred to the clinic, and they'd get to use these used CPAP machines as long as the students got to do some assessments with them. So, and these people would come back for years, so it was actually good service. And I mean, these used CPAP machines have been used millions of times over and over again. As long as they're clean and have proper air filters and everything, they should be just fine. But so number three is it possible to buy a CPAP machine without a prescription?
Well, I've been asked that question before. In order to buy from most of the reputable CPAP websites, you do have to upload a prescription. That's what I did when I bought my travel machine. I had my doctor's office took a picture of my paper prescription and emailed it to me, and then I uploaded that, and that seemed to satisfy the powers that were on that particular website. I know of no restrictions on used CPAP equipment, and I've never thought to go looking for a used CPAP machine, but I would imagine there's probably one for sale. The problem is, if you don't have a prescription, it probably means you didn't have a sleep study. Exactly. The sleep study is the mechanism through which they determine what your ideal pressure is for when you sleep. And the pressure can range, from very little to 20 centimeters worth of pressure. It's measured in centimeters. My own pressure number is 15, for example. Right. So I'm not sure how you would know what pressure to use if you didn't have the sleep study and therefore you didn't have a prescription. Because, of course, if you have the sleep study, your doctor's going to prescribe one. Unless you're just a weird, raging hypochondriac and you like medical equipment, which those people are out there.
Yeah.
I tend to be something of a hypochondriac myself, and I should not have access to peripheral medical equipment. Like, I have my own pulse oximeter, which I got when they first started diagnosing me with stuff. Right. And I was bad about wearing it all the time and worrying about it. And, I talked to my doctor, and he's like, you're making your blood pressure go up by doing this. Stop it.
Exactly.
So I'm like, yeah, so I shouldn't have access to this.
Yeah, so that's a good message. You want to get diagnosed, do a proper sleep study before you go exploring anything like that.
Yes, because, self-treating yourself with a CPAP machine, I suppose you could do it, but I don't know how you'd know if you had the right pressure.
Exactly. Okay, so next question was posted by Lawrence DeVore, and it says here, I have trouble falling asleep wearing my sleep apnea mask. What can I try? It's kind of a general question, but if there's anything that you can relate to that you might be able to suggest.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Learning to fall asleep with the mask on is it's a lengthy process. You have to come to get used to it. Because of the power of association, now I associate putting on the mask with being ready for sleep. But at first it was quite difficult. So one of the things you can do is practice good sleep hygiene. Excuse me. You have to avoid like tablets and computers for maybe 20 minutes to a half hour before bed. You have to try and set your bedtime at the same time each night. Try and make sure your room is nice and dark and free of distractions. All of the typical advice that they give you for sleep hygiene. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to establish a new habit. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, I was so exhausted when I was suffering from untreated sleep apnea, that even when I had the sleep study and they put me on the most uncomfortable bed I've ever been on, right. I'm like, this is a sleep clinic. You guys can't spring for a better mattress. But even then, with all of that junk on my head and goop to my skin and wires everywhere and things under my nose and a harness around I felt like Darth Vader before they were finished. And even then, I managed to sleep for the minimum number of hours that they needed to get their data because I was so tired.
Yeah.
So if you're having trouble falling asleep, look up advice on sleep hygiene. Try to follow those guidelines so that you're not stimulated before you go to sleep.
Right.
And what you'll find is if you're persistent and you just try to be relaxed, and if you're not falling asleep, get up, move around, and try again. Don't make the bed a place where you toss and turn. You don't want to create that mental association. But what you'll come to find is you start to associate the machine with sleep. Now, after 2 years, it feels weird to me not to have it.
Right.
And I don't actually dare sleep without it.
So some simple things, putting your phones or tablets outside of the room. And what were some of the other things you said?
Well, you want your bedtime to be regular. Right. Because you're establishing a sleep cycle. So you want to, as close as possible, have a routine. Say, okay, at 10 o'clock every night, I'm going to put my tablets and other things away. I'm going to, relax. I'm going to have the room nice and dark and just try to relax and chill out. They say that, for one thing, you can put the mask on and sit up in bed and maybe even read. Now, I can't do that because the mask interferes with my classes, and I can't put them on with the mask on, so I can't read with the mask on. But if you can, they encourage you to just sit there with the mask on and have it blowing, and you just kind of get used to the idea, get used to the feel of it. One thing you can do for additional comfort, I actually take a bandana and fold it almost like I'm making a headband.
Right.
And I put it around the back of my head to help cushion the straps from the headgear. Because what I found was over time, they were digging into the back of my head and abrading my skin.
Okay.
And ever since I started doing that, I've had no problems
Okay.
with that.
So next question is, how can I prevent myself from throwing off my CPAP mask when I'm sleeping?
I do that actually fairly regularly myself. Okay. I found that I do that sometimes in weird ways. Like I'll wake up and I'm holding my mask and I'm lying in bed, and I don't know how long I've been like that. One night I did that all night. I took it off and slept all night without it. And when I woke up, my uvula was all swollen, which happens. I looked that up on a forum devoted to CPAP, and it got better over the course of the day, but it was from that irritation. So there really is nothing you can do to prevent that from happening. You just have to try and make yourself as comfortable as possible. Again, like I said, with cushioning the straps and stuff. Sometimes you rip it off because you're having like an apnea, hypopnea type incident, and you're just freaking out. Like, there's stuff on my face. Why can't I breathe?
Right.
Before I got treated, every once in a while, my airway would dry out and I would choke to death in the night. Not all the way to death, but I would wake up going because I couldn't breathe at all. And I had 3 or 4 nights, several months apart, where I was kneeling on my own bed trying to force air into my body, thinking, I don't want to die like this. This seems like a really bad way to die. And it was really traumatic. So up to a point, there's nothing you can do to prevent yourself from doing weird stuff while you're sleeping. You just have to get into the habit of putting it back on if you discover you have taken it off. And trying to make it physically as comfortable as possible is the strategy that I've taken to try and prevent that, but it still happens.
Yeah, okay, that's good advice, because, it's something that might go away with time as you get more comfortable with it.
No, I'm pretty comfortable, and I still pull it off.
So. Okay, there you go then, there, from Phil's mouth. So next question is, and I've seen this actually posted in a few different places, and I'm glad we get to address it here, is, can hypnosis help sleep apnea?
I honestly am not a believer in the power of hypnosis. Sleep apnea is a physical thing. It's not a mental problem. It's not like you're just not sleeping right. No amount of relaxing is going to change your airway. No amount of positive thinking is going to change whether or not your airway is closing in the night. So hypnosis might help you relax and fall asleep, but the only treatments for sleep apnea there's surgery that is meant to open your airway, which sounds horrifying. It's like glottal shaving. There's the CPAP, and then there are mouthpieces that some people wear to try and hold their jaw in a way that keeps their airway open at night. I know a couple of people who use those. They snore pretty badly, so I don't know if they're working or not. But those are all options. But those are really the only options I know of. People are always looking for, and I've seen books like this on Amazon, the CPAP alternative, and cure your sleep apnea without actually. No, I'm sorry.
The free cure to sleep apnea.
Right. You have to get treated.
Yeah.
There is no shortcut to fixing sleep apnea. And unfortunately, it's not something you can mess around with.
Exactly.
It's going to kill you.
Hypnosis is not going to change your anatomy.
It's just not. Exactly. And let's say hypnosis is completely effective in affecting your mind. It still is not going to change how you breathe.
Exactly. So here's an interesting one. So how does marijuana, and we'll see if we can answer this, but how does marijuana or THC help with sleep apnea?
Well, it helps in the same way that alcohol does, which is to say, if you get really good and drunk, you're probably going to fall asleep pretty easily. But there's no drug therapy for sleep apnea that isn't like treating something else. Like, I'm on drugs that are related to my sleep apnea, but they're for my heart.
Right.
No amount of THC or anything else. It's not like, well, I have hemp oil now, so I'm better. No. Again, like hypnosis, unfortunately, while THC might help other things, and I'm not a huge believer in the benefits of medical marijuana, although I'm sure that it does help certain people with specific issues. Yeah. It's not going to help sleep apnea.
Yeah.
The thing is, sleep apnea is easily treated. We can easily treat the symptoms. A CPAP machine is a simple device. A mouthpiece is a relatively simple device, although getting it fitted by like your dentist or your doctor, I'm sure, involves some difficulty.
Yeah.
as far as the surgery to open your airway, that's kind of terrifying to me, and I wouldn't opt for it if they told me it was an option. But this is not complicated. I think people want an easy answer. They want an out. It's like saying, well, I want to go on this fad diet. Well, how about just eating less and exercising? Well, yeah, but I mean, if I eat nothing but grapefruit and then I chant on Tuesdays when the moon is full, how about eating less and exercising?
Yeah.
We know the answer. The answer is simple. And the cure for sleep apnea is as simple as treating it with either CPAP or one of those other two things that I mentioned. Right. That's really it.
Yeah, I actually did a little bit. I saw this question. I did a little bit of research with it just because I wanted to see if there's anything out there on it. And there was a newscast on one of the local ABC news, and it was saying that there was a cannabis derivative that will eventually be able to strengthen your airway anatomy. And it almost kind of scares me that is being promoted right now. Like, I mean, if that would be like the most miracle drug to ever come out for sleep apnea.
Well, yes, it would be. Stranger things have happened. Like, didn't they discover that at least some ulcers are caused by a bacteria and not just by the fact that you're stressed?
Exactly.
Every once in a while, medical science pulls something out of the air and they're like, oh no, it's this now. And like, really?
Right.
So, I mean, for instance, I remember when AIDS used to kill people.
Exactly, yeah.
Now they just go, like Magic Johnson has been alive for a really long time and he seems fine. So you never know what they're going to discover.
No, that's a good point. At our local St. Paul's hospital, they actually shut down the AIDS unit because they had nobody left to treat there as much. But
yeah.
What I was getting at with just the cannabis derivative is not to get too excited about these kind of things, because if there isn't any magic drug, I'm sure we'd be hearing about it a lot more. But
one of the things I have seen is they try to foist magic CPAP machines on you. I saw it was like a Kickstarter for a little tiny CPAP machine that was like the size of some kind of science fiction rebreather that you would just, stick to your face and no other equipment. And well, anybody who understands how a CPAP machine works, there's no way that little device is going to generate 10 to 20 centimeters of air pressure. So I don't know who they think they're kidding by thinking that this is actually going to be a possibility to make a CPAP machine smaller than the mask itself. I don't know how that's possible. And
exactly. And that's another thing. I know CPAP, sleep apnea companies get calls like every day about that for the past 1 or 2 years that it was announced. And they've raised I think $1 million on that Kickstarter. But the thing is like you said, to be able to generate those kind of pressures inside that small little device. I love innovative technology, but I wouldn't anybody get excited too soon about that.
Yeah. I mean, if they announce that and it's really expensive, I'll be the first person to line up and buy it. But
I don't even need it, and I'll buy
it.
Yeah.
Well, apparently you can resell it. I mean, that's one thing. I don't know. I don't consider it particularly moral, but there's obviously a market of people out there who want a CPAP machine, but they don't want to get a prescription. So you could conceivably buy a CPAP machine for a friend who doesn't have a prescription, who wants one. I know of no regulations that cover that, but it's a bad idea.
Right.
Because if there's no medical analysis to support the need for that CPAP machine, I don't know of any horrible side effects that happen if you don't need CPAP and you use it. I'm not sure who would want to.
Yeah.
I did read one fellow said that he thought it could cause apnea to develop, and I don't know if that's true or not.
I would doubt it myself, but
yeah, I mean, really, it's just forcing air down your throat.
Exactly.
So I don't know how that could have long-term bad effects, but
yeah, I've seen a lot of questions out there actually about increasing intraocular. Well, I mean, I don't want to say it not, but a lot of the times the higher pressures will just leak into your esophagus or just go out of your mouth if you're wearing a nasal mask.
Well, yeah, I saw a question on Quora about increased pressures. I do know, I know one fellow who uses a CPAP who was complaining to me about feeling bloated because it was actually swallowing air.
That can happen.
Yeah, that's usually a problem of having the pressure set too high, but not necessarily. And the cures are pretty much just, the usual things you would do to make yourself burp and get rid of it.
Exactly, yeah.
So
here's another question. Got a few more here. And again, these from beginner to advanced. The question here is, can CPAP machines provide enough pressure to unclogged, blocked noses?
I doubt it. One of the things, if you have a nasal CPAP mask, you can't breathe through your mouth if you're using a nasal mask. It creates a weird pressure deal where if you open your mouth, suddenly you're not breathing right. So often people who use the nasal mask, and they tried to give me one of these. They gave me the nasal mask, and then they gave me a chin strap to hold my mouth shut. And the whole thing felt like some kind of medieval torture device. What they eventually went with was the full face mask. I don't think a CPAP machine could unclog clogged sinuses. I think it just wouldn't work well.
It's not what they're for.
I honestly don't know. I'm getting over a cold myself, which I'm sure you can hear. Thank God I have the full face mask. I don't know how people who have just the nasal mask don't die when they have a cold. It seems like it would be impossible to breathe.
For sure. So next question is, are CPAP machines less effective if some of the air flows out of the mask?
Not really, as long as the leaks aren't so excessive that the machine itself is telling you it has a bad seal.
Right.
My machine makes a little green smiley face if it's content with the seal it's got. Those leaks do get reported in the data. So, some leakage is normal, especially as you shift at night.
Right, and for just, recycling the exit and getting the exhaled air out. There's actually, on a lot of CPAP masks, you'll see the small holes, and those are actually meant to have a constant leak so you can exhale properly and get all the ventilate properly.
It's not airtight at all. I mean,
exactly.
A friend of mine asked me, well, what happens if the machine stops at night? I'm like, well, it's not airtight. I'll just keep breathing.
Right. So, and this is our 10th and final question from the mailbag. So we got, can sleep apnea cause brain damage?
Yes. Sleep apnea can cause all kinds of horrible effects. It can hurt your heart, as it did mine. It can hurt your brain. It's very, very bad. Right. It's really a horrible thing that you should get treated if you think you have it.
Totally. So there's kind of like, you might agree, there's a cumulative effect over time.
Yes. The longer it goes untreated, the worse the effects will be on your body.
Right. And then, of course, with chronic high blood pressure, as that keeps getting worse and worse too, it could be an overnight, it could lead to a stroke. From there on, cause brain damage.
There's so many things that it increases the risk of, and so many deleterious effects. I, for years, ignored mine, and I regret it. I regret it very much. Right. Because if I had treated it earlier, I might not have as much to deal with now. It could be that my ejection fraction wouldn't be as bad, or maybe it wouldn't have happened at all. I don't know. So if I had followed up on it when I needed to, when there was no perceptible urgency, I'd be much better off. But again, there was no, I'm like, I snore, so what?
Well, Phil, that was so awesome. I really appreciate you doing all this. You're a colorful man, and all your experience. I really would encourage people to get his book. It's 99 cents on Amazon right now, right? And it's Phil's an excellent writer, and he really details. I actually was laughing out loud in some of the parts. It's good writing. But you can get Phil's book on Amazon. I'll make sure to put a link in the description below too. Where can our viewers learn more about you as well?
I have a website, philelmore.com, that has links to all my various social media accounts and everything. Okay. I'm a full-service writer. That's what I do for a living. So I offer writing and editing services. And
excellent. So we'll put a link in the description below for that as well. So to get your sleep apnea questions answered, you can post them in the comments below, or you can send them to info@resplabs.com. That's resplabs.com. And subscribe to our channel below, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to post your questions and comments below, or you can send them to info@resplabs.com. Subscribe to us on YouTube, and we'll see you in the next show.